Hello everyone, and welcome to my presentation on human security in the midst of twin disasters of Tal volcano and COVID-19. This is the case study of Hotel Dominique in Tagaytay City, presented by yours truly, Daniel Dominique as Ambat. My central question for this presentation is simple. What are the effects of both Tal volcano and COVID-19 for the human security of actors in Tagaytay City? Here are my sub-questions. How do residents, employees, and employers feel about the disasters? What did they do to ensure their own security amidst the disasters? And what prospects do they have for the future? The problem is that the Tagaytay volcano erupted an ashfall in January 2020, which led to the closure of restaurants and others in Tagaytay City. Nearly immediately after COVID-19 struck, and the same establishments were closed for several months because of the lockdowns. As such, especially in Tagaytay City, which is primarily reliant on domestic tourist traffic, as well as their hotel industry, functions, and etc., these several months of COVID-19 lockdowns have severely affected business operations. In fact, many of them have shut down. As such, you would expect multiple problems, not just in terms of economics, but also in terms of certainty, health, and the like, especially with your employees. However, employees were not spared as well. Given these two problems and the length and the severity, we now see a human crisis that is unprecedented in these recent times. In fact, given the multiple deaths and infections, we think that times are very tragic nowadays. As such, in order to understand the questions we asked earlier, we've used the following methodology. Given the limitations of COVID-19 quarantine and the health protocols still in effect, this researcher, yours truly, is limited to my immediately available resources. As such, because my personal networks in Hotel Dominique, a hotel that also operates in Tagaytay, we will try to use interviews to answer the earlier research questions. As such, I intend to use one-on-one interviews with some of the actors in Hotel Dominique. We hope to have a diverse set, which we will discuss in greater detail later on. The framework I will be using in general is Ogata and Sense Human Security Framework in order to understand the human security impact of these disasters. We hopefully can use a video documentary format, but be given the short time in this interview, we will also be using screenshots instead. What exactly do we mean by my methodology? We hope to target some Tagaytay City employees. For the sampling, given the limitations stated earlier, we will be using purposive and convenient sampling limited to a number of 5. We will be using one-on-one semi-structured interviews so that we can actually find any emerging themes that may actually appear. And analysis will be using thematic analysis and coding. As for the human security framework, although Ogata and Sen did mention that human security is the freedom from fear and the freedom from want, Tavanti further expounds on this in terms of freedom from vulnerability and freedom from shame. However, given the context of this research question, we will be focusing more on the right side of this equation, the freedom from want side, which we highlighted in green. So we'll be focusing on food, economic, health, and environmental security, given the nature of the impact. Education security will not be included as these employees are very clearly already graduates. So furthermore, as for the conceptual framework, therefore, we will be measuring these 4 aspects as we talked about earlier. So what are my interview questions? These questions were asked in both English and Tagalog for the convenience of the interviewees. And we will be asking 5. Number 1, what did they feel when Taal volcano exploded? Number 2, how did they feel when the COVID-19 pandemic first started? Number 3, were there any economic assistance from the workplace, like money or in-kind assistance? Number 4, were there any assistance from their respective local government units or barangays or their cities? And number 5, how did they feel about government policies? In general, we're talking about national government policies as well. So, because this is my family's hotel, we have to stress the ethical considerations taken into the study. So, I will be reading them one by one. First off, yours truly, the researcher, is also a SEC registered director of Hotel Dominique. So, this positionality and reflexibility is important to note. At once, this access to data allowed me to even have this study to be done in the very first place, leading to its feasibility. However, we have to recognize immediately that we had to assure the employees that any information they use will not be used to discriminate, intimidate, or retaliate against their employment status. We also made sure to get the consent of interviewees before the interviews, given the sensitivity of certain topics, and that because of both privacy and health reasons, upon any of the interviews requests, some of their faces will remain masked. And finally, if the viewer wants to actually see the raw footage, interview videos are available upon request for your transparency. With that out of the way, let's look at the interviews. So our first interviewee is Rene. He's a maintenance worker and he resides in Bacoor. These are both very important. So if you would look at the table to your right, we actually collated his responses into several categories. First, how did he feel during the Taal eruption, right? So he stayed home for 1 month because of his nature as maintenance. His wife, however, was a human resources supervisor in Manila, so she wasn't that much affected, and that they generally had enough income from the household. And he was still able to report for work because he would travel from Bacoor to Tagaytay via the Aguinaldo Highway through his owner motorcycle. However, he did note during the interview that it was still very hard to travel through Aguinaldo Highway because of the lahar due to the eruption. He also noted that throughout his travel, he imagined he would have had a harder time commuting using a bus because the public utility vehicles through Aguinaldo Highway were not able to move. Anyway, as such, he still managed to work anyway, given his regular schedule. What became different, however, was uh, when the COVID-19 pandemic happened for him. First of all, he asked when would it end, leading to feelings of anxiety. And his work shift got reduced to 2 times per week, and that he was more affected than his wife, who was actually work from home. He also noted different chaos and different local government unit checkpoints because he thinks that it's because of different policies. But still, given even with the chaos, he still was able to comply with protocols such as having quarantine passes. He tried to find alternative sources of income. However, there was freeze hiring, especially in both maintenance and security industries, given that people did not want to go out. To cope with this, he says that home workouts through YouTube or through his stock knowledge as a security person, such as calisthenics and push-ups, really gave him help. He didn't talk much about work assistance, but he noted that the hotel gave him some rice and some frozen goods for either consumption or for sale. As for his LGU, so we're talking about Bacoor here, and that's why it's important to note that is that his barangay in particular gave him 2 times 9,000 pesos financial assistance. And he notes interestingly that there are some processes where you can either ask for a financial assistance or get a guarantee letter to a hospital through their city hall. This was in response to what if you were sick and didn't have the money. But he also notes at the same time that this mechanism that he mentioned earlier is not known by many people anyway. The national government notes that he notes that PhilHealth is not enough, and that in general there's not much help anyway. In fact, much of the help is not known by the general public. But he thinks that if you go to DSWD or try your hand at the lotto, I think he was talking about the charity awards in particular, you might have some help. He noted other things as well, that you would have to rely on other people for help, especially through their referral systems, especially in government. He did take the AstraZeneca vaccine with no side effects, and that he felt more secure, especially because of the asymptomatic nature of the vaccine and don't know if others are sick. So he also notes that he should stay at home as well. Next, Maila is our front office head. She resides in Silay, Cavite. So during the Taal eruption, it didn't seem to be much of an issue because her only concern was to get home. She had asthma, but not much of a concern there. Her larger concern was COVID-19. Initially, she felt unsafe because the personal protective equipment were hoarded left and right, especially face masks. And not to mention that basic necessities and PPE prices increased 2 to 3-fold. She expected that the pandemic would last only for 1 month, but she got really bored. So, in order to alleviate her sense of restlessness, she went to a baking business and actually tried to use her social capital and her networks through Laguna factories. Apparently, she has former office mates in those factories and used them for referral systems in order to spread the word of mouth of her business. She claims this is actually a blessing in disguise because this became an additional income for her. As for work assistance, we still have processed goods, rice, and financial help as well. For her LGU, she noted that relief goods were only given during enhanced community quarantines, the highest level of uh, quarantine in the Philippines at that time. And she felt like relief goods should have been given to everybody because at the time of the interview, she noted that the relief goods were only given to the poorest of the poor, but she, being middle class, did not receive any of those goods. She also ran a sideline cosmetics business as an Avon makeup distributor. But because this was a non-essential business, meaning not non-food, non-commodity business, she lost much income from that. As for the national government in general, she just said that she did not feel much help from the national government, so didn't go too much detail. In general, she's relieved that cases are going down, but she's a vaccine skeptic because of many questions. Like she knows that vaccines have long clinical trials, so why is it that COVID has so quick vaccines? In fact, she's not 100% secure because it's not a curative thing, rather, it merely lowers the severity of the disease. Next, we have our chef Mojack. He's from Mendez. Mendez is the town next to Cavite, to Tagaytay rather. In general, he felt some depression because of a lack of source of income. As a chef, he had to be physically there. And during COVID-19 in particular, he tried baking at home in order to find other alternative sources of income, as well as find other work. But as a chef, this is difficult because Tagaytay is heavily dependent on foot traffic. In fact, in his household, he noted that he had to have a lower quality of life. In his terms, pinagkakakasya and paraan. What he told me was, for example, they had to eat less viands or ulam, less delicious ones. Sometimes they would not even have meat at all, just to fit their daily budget. They tried going for online jobs that didn't work out at all. As for work assistance, they noted that even the owners were at loss because of the financial losses that time, and that the help was not sustainable given the economic problems of the owners. However, he did note that the owners helped with food packs, money deliveries, and the owner tried to supplement income through sidelines as well. As for LG assistance, from Mendez, there were relief goods, one time 4,000 pesos cash, and there were only few days where they had food. For the national government, he notes that in general, they complied with government mandates such as having face masks and face shields, and they also had a one-time financial assistance from the Social Security Service of 16,000 pesos. Uh, as for miscellaneous, he feels okay today. Before, not so much. In general, he attributes his feeling of security to more events because of vaccines. And he has a little bit more hope for the future because he feels like he has more autonomy back again. Because he's able to work again as a chef. Next is Jonard, our sales manager. He resides in Tagaytay. During Tal eruption in general, because he expected it to be closed for 1 month and because they still had events lined up, he was okay, pretty much. COVID-19 was a different story though. Because of the many months of lockdowns, he didn't have a job. He is, after all, reliant on sales from events. He was more reliant on the income from his call center BPO family members, and that their family business, a t-shirt business, was still bleeding money because of loans and operational expenses. In fact, he felt feelings of shame, and that he felt like he had no choice but to find ways in order to get to overcome the crisis. As for work assistance, there was rice, financial assistance again, sale of frozen goods. But he notes that it's not enough because the pandemic lasted very long. LG assistance in Tagaytay, 3 to 4 months, with substantial amounts of rice and canned goods, but still it's not enough. As for the national government, he also feels like the cash assistance not enough, although he still notes the same 16,000 pesos worth of financial cash assistance. So today he also feels okay, and also more certain of things and more secure because of events, because his job is directly tied to the sale of events. However, he does feel uncertain about the next few months if there will be any unknown curveballs that will come his way. And finally, we have Diane. She's an admin assistant who also resides in Tagaytay. At the time of the eruption, she was taking an English test, and she felt scared, but nothing more beyond that. So when COVID-19 hit, she stayed home. She had worries on how to live because the hotel had no money in customers. Instead, she turned to selling eggs and oil in particular in order to stay afloat. However, among all the five interviews, she's the only one with a closed case. Fortunately, those were mild cases in terms of her mother-in-law and her child. And when she got tested, it was negative. She did note that he didn't have enough money for the hospital as well. She mentioned her doctor relative as well, who told her firsthand about the severity of hospital operations at that time. As for work assistance, the same processed foods, eggs, cash, but she felt a concern for the management, and she was wondering about what about others who are not in the same position as they are in terms of work assistance. LGU assistants, same as Jonard, but she noted about fairness. And she also noted that senior citizens got more, such as Jollibee Foods. For the national government, she's satisfied with their capacity in general, but she notes that hospital capacity understandably was overwhelmed. And she concurs with her doctor cousin. Finally, she got the Pfizer vaccine, lessen the sickness, take care of one's health, but don't go out, be more have practice sanitation, and etc. So let's analyze this through the framework we mentioned earlier. Through the lens of human security and these four factors, we note a few things. Number one, obviously, is health. There's massive impact on survival, anxiety, developments in vaccines also matter, and unknown developments are also a factor with one's health security. And that money for hospitalization also matters. When we talk about food, we're talking about mostly in terms of the relief goods, right? Limited supplies at that time. But turns out that they can be fungible as well in terms of the hotel giving processed foods or using foods as fungible, saleable object for more capital, right? We also noted, especially in the case of Mojack, that they had to eat less quality food in order to fit their budget. It's in terms of economic security, this is very important. Lockdowns were a major factor. Not enough support coming from the LGUs and the national government, and because the relief cash is only one time, that is people were very reliant on their social networks for support. You look at Jonard's example, for example, about their call center relatives, or for Rene's wife who was work from home. So we note that this is very industry dependent because remember, all five of them are working in the hotel industry, which is very reliant on physical foot traffic. Finally, for the environmental factors, in general, the volcano ash was not a big factor, but more importantly, the lockdowns by the physical barriers by law enforcement are a larger factor. The regulatory environment was also a large factor when it comes to the certainty or uncertainty of the lockdowns, for example, and when hotels could open. And that knowledge of the environment is also very important. We note this with both Diane and Rene being more secure when they knew about the environment. So let's conclude this. Let's talk about the research questions. What were the effects of the two incidents in human security factors? They're both very negative, multiple but very negative. What about their feelings? Taal ashfall, absolutely not much of a problem, but COVID-19 was much more pronounced, exponentially. It's now better now because cases are lower with jobs and people have vaccine. What about the processes that they went through? We're talking about short-term relief from multiple actors, but we note themes of autonomy and self-reliance because employers the local government and the national government are simply not reliable given the unsustainability of the pandemic caused by the pandemic. Sorry. And finally, what prospects of the future do they have? If I were to summarize that, hoping for the best, preparing for the worst, and everything is still uncertain. So that's it. Thank you very much. Hopefully, you can return to a time when Taal is like this again, clean and pristine. As for my reference, you may see the following.